Okay, well, welcome to another edition of our Create the Ripple podcast. For those of you tuning in for the very first time, my name is Candice Smiley, and I get the pleasure of interviewing amazing men and women, but mostly women for the meantime, who are really choosing to live in their truth and get out there. And this is really a platform for them to share their stories. Stories, I think, are what bring us together as a people. We find ourselves seeing ourselves in other people's stories. And so that's really the intention here. You can find other podcasts or stories like this on the network that carries us. Thank you so much, the Divas That Care Network, for setting up that. They've got a great website, same name, divasthatcare.com, a number of books and options. So go check them out, I guess is what I'm saying. But you're certainly welcome to follow along us here, stay on this channel as well. We will be posting all of the links, both to connect with our guests as well as to connect with the Divas That Care Network below. So feel free to go down and check out the comments below. We'll make sure that those are there for you. Now, my guest today is Tiffany Sparrow. She is a stunning individual who I have known for a while, and recently we've had an opportunity to really come together and connect, which is super cool. And today we get to hold space together and chit chat. So Tiffany, I'm going to let you come on and sort of share. You gave me a bit of a bio, but to be honest, I really love it when it comes out of the guest's mouth, because then I get to hear sort of your take on yourself. So feel free to just let us know who you are and sort of what you're up to in the world. And I got a couple questions for you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Candice. Nice to connect with you and be here as always. Um, Talk about myself. Okay.
Tough one for you. Yes, I know.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. Well, I guess as tends to be the trend these days are for creatives and healers, I do tend to wear a couple of different hats, but the overarching umbrella of how I be and how I show up in the world has to do with music, vibration, and wellness, and the intersection of these two.
Mhm.
And so that comes out in a whole bunch of different offerings, right? So I write songs and I perform those. I do sound healing meditations. I am a clinical music therapist. I've done my training in ethnomusicology, so looking at music of the world and how people around the world are using, specifically I looked at chant traditions and how chant traditions kind of show up and can be interpreted in terms of a tool for health and well-being.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if I should break those down a little bit more in terms of what each of those are, but
Well, I was thinking, I was like, chant traditions. This sounds really interesting. And so
yeah.
for me, I grew up in a music tradition as well. I played piano for like 14 years. I've been classically trained in more the operatic space for about 18. So music and healing is certainly a big deal. I mean, this weekend I had an opportunity to go for a couple of drives, and I tell you, the music was cranked, right? Just working through
Mhm.
some stuff. And so let's talk about some of that and how you've sort of chased that. Cause I was like, that's an interesting path for you to take. So why don't you tell us more about that as is led for you?
I mean, everything is born out of, for me, anyways, my own explorations and my own path towards wellness and healing. And so, absolutely having, uh, dealt with different things through a teen, primary of which, eating disorders, and faced that at a very young age, and found that at the time there was not quite the same kind of programming that there is now, but even then the cognitive behavioral approaches weren't quite working for someone like me.
Hmm.
So then that led me to explore, well then, okay, what else, what is more soul based, what is more spiritually informed, that can help me get beyond the thought patterns, right, that CBD does really well in trying to retrain,
Hmm.
but getting more into the root of the nervous system, or the subconscious patterns, I think, that have been disrupted, or I'm not even sure. I don't even have an explanation as to why this is all unfolded in my life, but it's been more about a journey of how to unwind myself from it. So from that, found, music has been through my family. Ended up turning to music and songwriting a little bit as a teen, but really kind of delved into it in my 20s, and ended up at the U of A doing performance in opera, all that kind of stuff. And it was good to a certain extent, but really found that the how do I say this? The climate, the environment that it takes to be in a performance based route, or even in the music industry in general, I think as a stereotype doesn't really work for me. That the develop a thick skin and get out there, and I found it really re-traumatizing, maybe even to my nervous system. I found it really difficult and very stressful. And so after my second year of university, that's when kind of the Mozart effect, and I don't know if you ever knew or have heard about that, John Campbell, and this idea that Mozart's music can make us smarter, which, I think some of those ideas are a little bit overgeneralized. There's a little bit to it, but anyways, that's an aside. That was kind of big at that time. And then just kind of randomly or synchronistically, right, ended up meeting a friend of a friend who knew someone who was a music therapist, talked to her once. She told me where she went to school. And then I was like, yep, all my eggs in that basket, going for it. And then I ended up in music therapy training. And it was a really lovely combination of psychology and wellness, along with how to use music to assist. And so music, not just performatively, although performance can be a wellness goal, right? It can boost confidence, it can be an expression, right? But it's not just focused on this idea of perfection, performance, fitting into a certain box necessarily. It felt much more liberating and open. And at that time, I also started yoga, like more rigorously and seriously than just looking through articles and magazines that I had been doing as a teen. So it was kind of this combination of this more open form of how can we use music, along with some of the philosophical and somatic training with yoga that's been kind of the thread of my life now, different variations of those combinations of things. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think, but I think, isn't that life though? You kind of, you start wandering, like how you said that, and you're like, that's me, all the eggs in this basket. But I love that you were on this journey because you were prioritizing your healing. And I think that is significant. I know that
Mhm.
for a lot of, the more artistic types, as you said, right, they find so much healing. And isn't that thing that we're drawn to, that's usually our medicine, right? And when we work
Mhm.
on what is our medicine, that comes out in other spaces. And for
Mhm.
lots of people, that can be many different things. I know for some people it's things like dance. That's, that might be my medicine. But good music it can just change a mood. So I love that. I love how, that desire to find that healing was born from something fairly traumatic, right? That there's lots of different
Mhm.
ways to heal from that, but you really said, hey, I'm sort of responsible for my own healing here, and I need to figure
Totally.
out what's going to help me get there. I know that that's really become a gift for you. I'm thinking about when you and I met for coffee or tea, I guess it was a year, maybe more ago, and you were still working on, your big thesis. Crazy, right? You were deep into that. Oh my goodness. And your topic, and you
Yeah.
were like, I'm thinking about this and
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that. And I mean, for our listeners, they went like right over my head. And I was just like, I was in awe of, this topic. Loved listening, but you lost me in
And
the
like,
first
what?
little bit. But
Oh.
how neat that is that we're able to chase our passions and to do that. Now I know that you really do love sort of this blending, this marriage of music and wellness. Why don't you talk to us about that? Because I know you do have your own channels, and people can find you on music. Congratulations, by the way. I know you've been having quite a bit of chart topping success in various different
Yeah.
markets. So for those of
Right.
you who haven't checked out Tiffany before, why don't you let them know where they can find you? Again, we'll make sure those links are certainly down in the box
Mhm.
below. But go and listen to them. I mean, personally, one of my favorites is your journey on. So at some point, I'd love for you to sort of share with us the story of that. But this music and wellness, let's talk more about that, and I'm sure that'll weave into some of the other things there.
Okay. Music and wellness. Well, in the last decade, I mean, music therapy has been a thing since World War II, basically, right? It's been a modern profession, if you will, although it's dated back, well beyond that in terms of ancient or shamanistic indigenous practices, let's say.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the last 10 years, I would say there's been a significant upsurge in research around it. And
Yes.
so now the research is just, there's all kinds of research, and which is awesome in a lot of ways. And also it's a bit chaotic because there's different ways that music and wellness shows up.
Mm-hmm.
um, how do I explain this a little bit more? So with music therapy, for example, music therapy is when a person who is trained in music therapy is using music and different musical elements to interact with an individual or a group to assist with their wellness, to maintain or assist with their transformation, right? So the idea behind music and wellness in that case has to do with relationship too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the interaction between individuals, and how music can be a vessel for space holding, for witnessing, and just all of the myriad of things that music in and of itself does outside of a therapeutic relationship, right? But so there's been research on how music definitely impacts, as you've said, the emotions, and it has the ability, it can promote state changes really quickly. It's really intricately linked to memory too, right? So it can
Mm-hmm.
assist with individuals to recall aspects of personality, and episodes in their lives, as opposed to just the musical song itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so just as much as it can be very much a wellness tool, there are also aspects that it can also be, it's a tool. It's like anything, right? There's ways we need to take precaution with it as well and take
Mm-hmm.
care. So just as it can be a stimulus response, we can help repattern, and we can remember information. We can help retrain a new habit using music, right? It also, if we're used to using music with certain behaviors, then it can also stimulate those behaviors. So sometimes when you go to addiction centers, they request that you don't have your musical devices just for that reason, because it can be such a strong trigger
Interesting.
emotionally in
Mm-hmm.
terms of memory, right? So, and sometimes then that's a matter of, okay, well, we don't go to familiar songs. Like if I was working with somebody in that case, we go to improvisation and we start creating new things, right? Or like something that can be associated with, okay, where are we now and what are we moving to now?
Wow, that is
Um,
so
yeah.
interesting. And this
Hmm.
reminds me, so I was home educated. And so
Hmm.
obviously my parents were very involved in my education and that sort of thing. And for me, if I hear something put to music 3 times, it's memorized. It's just like in there, right? But of course you can
Hmm.
rattle something off and you can ask somebody that knows me, they'll be like, where's this? And I'm like, I don't remember. Did you say something? But put it to a song, it's there, right? And so that's how they used to help me learn, was they would put things to a tune and
Mm.
we'd sing it through, and then it was just like I
Yep,
was good to go. So
totally.
so interesting that it goes right back. I'm gonna be thinking about that, because yeah, there are some songs that sort of lead you down that path. I mean, music is definitely memory, right? That for me, for sure, right? You hear that song, doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, right? You were like right back to that, person, place, or thing, right? That you
It
were, oh
totally
my
can.
gosh,
Yeah.
just like that. Wow, that is so interesting. Okay,
Yep.
this is
And
fascinating.
I mean, the education system uses it, right? Or like,
Yeah.
you think like Sesame Street or whatever, like there was tons of use of music, right? For
Yes.
old, I
Today
mean,
is
it's still
brought to you
on
by the
actually, so it's
letter
not old school, it's
T.
not
Yes.
OG.
Yes.
It's still happening. But all of, a lot of educational tools or shows or programs use music, but then also advertising. I mean, it's just used brilliantly with those
Oh
jingles,
yeah.
right? And they get stuff. So that's definitely one way it triggers,
Huh.
memory. But on top of that, there's also lots of research coming out about the benefits physiologically, right? So
Sure.
just assisting with reduction of pain, or pain perception, I guess, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
cortisol levels, or helping to reduce stress, or breath rates, or heart rates, and all that kind of stuff, right? So um, there's just lots of research. And one of
Wow.
the neat things that we know now neurologically is there's not one music center in the brain. In fact, music can stimulate and light up a whole bunch of the brain. And so that's part of why it can just be of assistance for so many different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like, when I go to work with somebody, I've worked with a whole diverse, from palliative to, as we talked about, addictions, to the medical model, to
Mm-hmm.
kids. It's been kind of like, and over time, starting to figure out, okay, where do I feel personally called? Because it literally is like, well, what you got? I can, I can figure out a way to assist with that. What do you have? Okay, let's reprogram this a little bit and fit it into what works for you, which is the brilliance of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's a real gift. So I'm really glad that we got to do this. And of course, you and I were talking before the broadcast for my listeners. We tend to have a little chat session beforehand, because I kind of want the interview to have its own energy, right, and sort of just
Mm-hmm.
take a temperature of where people are at. But I feel like I had an idea in my head about what you did with music therapy, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I had no idea what you did. And so how cool is this? And we get to chat. And you and I have had lots of chats.
Right. Lots of conversation. I mean, but it shows up in different ways, right? Obviously, the
Yeah.
way that I work in a hospital,
Yes.
where space is limited resources, I can only, it's basically guitar and a few
Mhm,
instruments, right? Versus when I'm doing like a sound meditation in a
mhm,
community of people that are maybe more alternatively based and showing up for that kind of thing, where I can have space for my singing bowls and
mhm,
it's more receptive where they lie down and receive versus participate in the music. Like it's just, there's variation, and it's a matter of, for me, learning to get clearer on describing those variations,
mhm,
but also education. Like when we say the word music, I mean that whole, music is healing. Like that's, I usually am like, music can be, and it so depends on so many things,
mhm,
including the style, but also the context, how it's being delivered, the person that's receiving it, right? Like it's not
mhm,
just music is healing, period.
mhm.
Music can be harmful is also a message that I also like to put out there, and
Sure.
or it can just be ineffective, right? Or it can just be kind of like background or distracting, or so it's a matter of one of the things that I teach about is about how to be more mindful of these things, or 6 tips to be mindful in terms of how to use music and sound for your own well-being, and just considering some of those things, right, that maybe we don't think about.
Interesting, because I know that when I
Hmm.
had Inara, this is when I really started to pay attention to. I mean, I'd always sort of been paying attention to music because it has such an impact on me, right? So that was
Hmm.
easy. But I was really cognizant of not playing the radio randomly when she was
Hmm.
asleep listening, because I didn't know what was playing or what was being said and what's being broadcast into her
Hmm.
very porous mind, right?
Totally.
That's been a big deal for me for a long time. So I think it's really interesting how, you sort of brought that back around and validated that for me. Now, we've got
Totally.
probably another good 10 minutes here for you and I sort of chit chat, but this is when I like to sort of hand over the interview to the guests and say, if there was something sort of on your mind that you wanted to share, obviously this can be shared across a couple of YouTube platforms, yours, mine, and the Divas That Care.
Mhm.
It's going to be shared, down in through LinkedIn. If you guys haven't checked that out, we've got a Divas That Care LinkedIn as well. So you can go check us out there. And then of course into some groups, largely focused on women and that kind of thing. So these are combination of making sure people know that other people exist, right? Because sometimes,
Mhm.
networks need to come together, and that's when, I believe in collaboration, and
Totally.
that, right? So presenting that
Mhm.
story, but also for that person maybe who's sitting there and thinking, oh, there's something here for me. So I'm just going to unleash you and say, whatever you want, um, whatever you get to
Okay.
say,
Cool.
calls
Well,
yours.
I mean, you mentioned some of the songs I've written and some of the music that's coming out right now, and so I think I'll weave that into some of what I would like to say, or in terms of the directions I'm taking with music therapy and this music too,
Mm-hmm,
because this music is born out of my own personal work, and also being inspired by being and witnessing other people
mm-hmm,
through watershed times is kind of what I'm saying, like what people do when there's disruption,
mm-hmm,
and the response to that. And so Journey On, which was the first single that was released last month, is a song that I wrote when I was really in the depths of really confronting my eating disorder. And really, I dealt with most of it. It was mostly like the behaviors were mostly like, you know, not happening anymore or anything like that. But some of the root and the perfectionism patterns, and we're still really had hooks. And I was, you know, managing, I guess, right? Or dodging or doing things I needed to do. And I'm definitely compassionate with myself around it. But there came a time when I was like, no, look, just like we were talking about earlier, it's like mama picks you up, sets you down and goes, okay, it's really time to look
you
at
need
this.
to deal with this.
And
Yes.
that, I felt that calling, and I kind of did that, took myself out of, gypsy land and traveling and, la, 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 which was beautiful in its own ways. But like, hey, look at this. And it became really uncomfortable, like really physically, like wanted to just like, well, if I could just peel off my skin, like it was just, but there was a part of me that knew that what was beyond this discomfort
Mm-hmm.
was far more liberating than all of these little ways that I was sort of managing, right? And just sort of the little glimmers of freedom or impulses that would really quickly go away. And I mean, there's still that, of course, but I knew that there was a greater amount of freedom available to me. So anyways, journey on. You can't go back now. You've come too far. Journey on, remembering who you really are. Like that. It's very much a song about, don't, keep going. Feels really and hellish potentially right now, but this is the path. And it was like a fiery, grounded call to action to myself to like, yep, 1,000 times, you've walked this road and and you think and you want this, but you're doing it and keep on, right? So that's what that song is about. Little Rain, which is coming out in 2 days, coming out on Thursday.
Sweet.
Yeah, right. It's kind of a different flavored, whereas Journey On sort of has, people were like, oh, kind of country rock, indie, and a fairly strong beat. Little Rain is more gentle, I guess, kind of folky, I guess, in nature. And it's a song about the metaphor of rain, of course, of being representative of releasing emotions and the importance of that and allowing that process. And in order for there to be a cleansing, to heal, to clear the dust, from this dry land, to heal my heart from the storm's bitter rage, right? Like just those tears can be a necessary part, in that it's okay to let them flow and not need to repress them. And I can breathe again, I can love again after that, right? Like the spring comes. So again, that was a song both inspired by my own journey, but also often working with people where they start to cry and they'd apologize. And it's like, I'm here, I'm simply witnessing, I'm not judging your tears, and I actually see them to be beneficial. And I think there's been research around just some of when the emotional tears come out, just some of what happens hormonally, or just in terms of our endocrine system, and just the benefits and release that way, right? So so I'm passionate about the songwriting process in terms of myself getting clearer. Music and lyrics can speak sometimes what we're feeling, and that's part of why we resonate. And where I'd like to kind of tie this in with music therapy, and I think we've talked about this, I'm more and more honing in on working with people who are moving through their journey of body positivity, moving through body image, moving through the remnants of their eating disorder. And it's really, I'm creating, education around that, and just programs around that right now, and just working with people at the hospital with that in group settings. But it's really a calling for me, and I've walked the path. I'm
That's
walking the path,
beautiful. Like
and
I'm
so I'm
like,
really a fan of
wow.
walking the talk. Yeah, it's
Mm.
where I'm feeling like I can really best be of service to people, and I feel very passionate about it. And I know that desperation, and I've heard people talk about it, that feeling of just, I'm caught in this loop. It can be like an addiction, right? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I've been there, and yes, it's up to you, but I'm here to say that there is a way through. You're not stuck here forever, and I can potentially be of assistance to you. So that's what I'm feeling called into these days.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. And surprising, to be completely honest with you. And I know I mentioned this a couple of times, and I felt like I wanted to say that, last week when I started these whole interviews, is I was surprised, right? Even though I've connected, and I haven't interviewed anybody that I don't have a personal relationship with yet. And yet the stuff that came out when we set aside this time to connect, to talk about, what are you actually up to, and what are you putting out into the world, and what are you sharing? And that was really the driving force for me. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I
Mhm.
became an event planner years ago, was I wanted to create platforms for people to share. And now that's moved into an online world. And certainly the circumstances of the world right now have, added some extra oomph to that, transitioning all that quicker. But what a unique, like, what an offering, what a gift. I haven't struggled to the extent with an eating disorder. However, there was a moment in my teens where and I was lucky enough to have a grandparent who stepped in, recognized it immediately, and really sort of helped me shut
Mhm.
that down before it became significant in any way.
Mhm.
But certainly body image and positivity, I mean, that's been its own struggle, right?
Mhm.
And there's certainly a love-hate relationship with food, right?
Mhm.
And been working on that more so since, the birth of my daughter, knowing that I didn't want to transfer, our thoughts and our cells contain energy and memory. I was really cognizant of what I was potentially transferring to her, right? So anyway, I think you and I could have a few of these conversations, which is great. So far, I've been saying there are going to be some encores of these, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess, a couple more minutes before we wrap up. Again, for our listeners, we will be dropping links so you can, see the
Yeah.
launch down below. We'll make sure you've got lots of ways to connect with Tiffany. But Tiffany, anything else you want to leave
Well,
the listeners with?
just on that just on that note too, I mean, most of what I'm releasing currently is, I mean, online. I plan to do it online, but given the timing, it's like,
Bonus.
okay.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
thing I hadn't booked anything or any halls or whatever, right? And I'm just releasing one single at a time, and it's a double album that I have coming out of songs that I've been writing for several years now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they can find that on Spotify and iTunes and Google Play, all the typical places, Amazon, all of that. So it's
Cool.
all kind of on Tiffany Sparrow. I have other music which I've kind of rebranded and which we didn't talk about, but under Sparrow Grace. And so that music is more of the chant-based
Okay.
music, which we haven't talked about, and that's a whole other kettle of worms, right, in some ways. But it's yogic music, it's prayerful, it's in Sanskrit, it's world music recorded in India. So that's also all online under Sparrow Grace.
Beautiful.
And it's all on my website,
Okay.
sparrowharmonics with an X.com, which I know you'll link
Yeah, we'll make sure
to.
that we
And
link
so,
that. And, for our
mhm.
listeners, head over to those links and again, check, because we really make sure regardless of the platform that you're listening to this on or watching us on, we do our best to make sure that the links are here. And that's really we can make that connection happen. So we definitely will have to have an encore, and we'll talk about some of that chant stuff,
Yeah.
because I'm intrigued. You're gonna get a phone call from me later today, being like, okay, girlfriend, talk to me about this chant stuff.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
tying it into some of my Métis heritage and the chant tradition in that now too these days, but
okay.
that's lots to
No,
talk
that's
about.
cool. That's cool. So anyway, obviously lots for people to continue to learn about you. And I know that, you're definitely
Mhm.
open to connecting through various social channels. She's active
Totally.
on there. Certainly if you're listening to this in real time and you're seeing this posted, go and check that out. Obviously your launch in a couple of days. But yeah, I think that's about a wrap for us this particular time. But I wanted to say a big, huge thank you for joining me and holding space today. This is really cool. I'm definitely been
Thank
blessed by the
you.
last few minutes. That's
Awesome.
awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for starting this platform. And you're so right. Just like, it's almost a lesson to me and other people potentially, just like to schedule, some time to like sit down and you know, informally interview
Well, to
the
just
people you
talk,
love. I
like,
know,
what are you
your
actually
parents,
up
right? Or
to?
whatever,
Yeah,
right?
and
Yeah, like we haven't talked about it, like, what do you think about this?
yeah, I know that that often happens to and certainly right now a lot of people are launching online programs or putting their
Mhm,
offerings online. And at first I was a little overwhelmed by all of that. And then I realized, wow, there were some really cool people in my space. And I was able to reach out to one even today. And she said, hey, I kind of want to work with you on a bigger level. I don't know what that is. We don't necessarily have businesses that would necessarily blend super easily. But we both work with people who would be open to, like, so there's sort of people that are willing to look at different things. And I said, well, then
mhm,
let's schedule a half an hour where we take 15 minutes each and we literally talk about what we're passionate about and what we're birthing into the world right now and what we're busy doing. And then we'll know who and
mhm.
how that might come together. And if we don't immediately, it'll sit, in the subconscious and it'll figure itself out over time. So yeah, so thank you for that reminder today. That's
Awesome.
powerful stuff. All right, well, I'm going to wrap this
Okay.
up. If anybody would like to be on one of these, obviously you're welcome to connect with me below. All of my links as well to connect are, of course, going to be in the chat box below. And of course, check out the Divas That Care, because there are a ton of other divas on there. We're reclaiming that word. It's just really about women getting on plan, on purpose, and willing to get the message out there. So thank you so much for joining me today, and hopefully you click yes and connect and follow along with the rest of the playlist. Oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Whether you're following, liking, loving, commenting, subscribe. that doesn't take very much of your time, but for those of us working to put really great content out there, it really, really matters. So thank you so much for that. And we will talk to you guys again soon. Thanks so much.